most people only become productive when they panic.
Right.
So today, we are unpacking a really massive stack of sources for you. I mean, we're talking cognitive neuroscience papers, tactical boxing training manuals, marketing psychology studies, and even some hedge fund performance data.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild mix.
It is. But we're doing this to show you exactly why that panic productivity happens,
Yeah.
and more importantly, how you can actually weaponize it.
Exactly.
Our mission for this deep dive is to explore the double-edged sword of urgency. We're going to look at how panic-driven urgency literally, hijacks the biological plumbing of your brain.
It completely rewires you in the moment.
Right. And then we're going to hand you the blueprint for mastering what we're calling controlled urgency. This is all about learning how to activate laser focus, kill your procrastination, and, execute on your biggest goals without completely burning yourself out.
Because understanding the underlying mechanisms behind our reactions to deadlines is really the only way to take back control of our attention. I mean, right now, for most of us, our attention is just entirely dictated by the clock.
Oh, 100%.
But before we can use urgency as a tool, we have to isolate what it actually is. In the research, urgency isn't just a generic feeling of being rushed. It is a highly specific, measurable psychological trait.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because looking at the clinical psychology sources we pulled, they measure this using something called the UPPSP scale.
Right. And just to translate the clinical jargon for a second, the UPPSP scale is a tool researchers use to measure a person's tendency to engage in rash, impulsive behavior, specifically during intense emotional states.
So it's not just regular impulsivity.
No, it separates general impulsivity from emotional impulsivity. So it tracks both negative urgency, which is like snapping at your partner because you're running late for a flight.
We've all been there.
Yeah. Right, exactly. But it also tracks positive urgency, which might look like making a massive, highly risky financial bet just because you're riding the high of a previous win.
Got it. So it's the combination of emotion and time pressure that really short-circuits our normal decision-making.
Yeah, and it acts as a transdiagnostic risk factor.
Meaning what, exactly?
That means this specific biological tendency to act rashly under emotional pressure, it actually underlies a massive variety of behavioral issues, everything from substance abuse to compulsive spending.
Wow.
To understand the mechanism behind it, we have to look at how the brain allocates resources. When a sudden unexpected deadline drops, you enter this biological state called the attentional vortex.
The attentional vortex. That sounds intense.
It is physically intense. Under high sudden urgency, the blood flow in your brain literally diverts. It's pulled away from the prefrontal cortex, which is, the highly evolved area responsible for logic, long-term planning, goal-directed behaviors.
What? The smart part.
Exactly. And it is violently redirected to the amygdala, which is your primitive survival center.
So it's basically like a company where the CEO gets locked out of the building and the security alarm system suddenly starts making all the executive decisions.
That visual hits the nail on the head. That's exactly it. And we have fascinating data on how poorly that security alarm runs the company.
I bet.
There's a study published in the journal PLOS, one that tracked cognitive control tasks under severe time pressure. They use what are called spatial and numerical Stroop tasks.
Yeah, I was looking at the methodology for those Stroop tasks, and it's a brilliant trap for the brain.
It really is.
For those of you listening, it's the classic test where, for example, you see the word left T on a screen, but the word itself physically appears on the right side of the screen.
Right, it messes with you.
Yeah, and the instruction is to press a button indicating the meaning of the word, so you should press left. But there's massive mental friction because your brain naturally wants to react to the physical location of the stimulus, which is on the right.
Normally, your prefrontal cortex steps in, suppresses that primitive urge to click the physical location, and forces you to correctly follow the instruction. It's goal-directed cognitive control.
Right.
But the PLS-1 researchers found something incredible when they imposed high urgency. When they gave subjects a microscopically small window to react, human performance didn't just decline, it actually dropped below chance level.
Wait, meaning they performed worse than if they had just flipped a coin?
Yes. Specifically, there is a tiny, roughly 250 millisecond window where the brain becomes entirely stimulus-driven. You become physically incapable of using goal-directed logic.
Because the CEO is locked out.
Exactly. The prefrontal cortex is offline, so you just react to the loudest, most obvious physical stimulus in your environment. You click right almost every single time.
Okay, if our performance drops below chance because we just blindly react to the loudest stimulus, does this mean setting tight deadlines for ourselves is actually a terrible idea? Like, are we just artificially lowering our own IQ?
Well, this raises an important question. The critical distinction is whether the urgency is imposed on a hot emotional state or a cold controlled state.
Okay, elaborate on that.
When a deadline is sudden, unexpected, and creates panic, it induces a hot state. That is when the CEO gets locked out of the building. But what makes this circuitry even more fragile is that it doesn't just require panic to trigger.
What else triggers it?
Research from UC Berkeley demonstrates that simple physical fatigue or hunger severely weakens your inhibitory control. If you're exhausted, your prefrontal cortex is already starved for energy, making you highly susceptible to falling into this attentional vortex over minor inconveniences.
Which explains exactly how this biological glitch gets weaponized against us in the real world.
Mhm.
I mean, marketers don't just know about the attentional vortex, they actively engineer it.
Oh, constantly.
When you see a countdown timer on a checkout page or a flashing red tag that says, only 2 items left in stock, the goal is to compress your decision-making window and force you into that 250 millisecond stimulus-driven state.
Yeah, they are leveraging loss aversion. The human brain views losing an opportunity as a much greater threat than gaining something of equal value.
Right.
So by creating sudden time scarcity, marketers force your brain to abandon rational, slow evaluation and rely on heuristics, which are essentially low-energy mental shortcuts.
So you just don't think about it.
Your brain decides it doesn't have the caloric budget to analyze the purchase, so it just reacts to the fear of missing out.
But the sources highlight a really interesting backfire effect for the marketers themselves. There is a study published in the PsyCH journal showing that time pressure absolutely destroys variety-seeking behavior.
The mechanism there is fascinating. Under tight deadlines, a specific demographic of consumers, those with a prevention focus, meaning their primary motivation is the fear of making a mistake, will completely default to familiar, safe choices.
They just shut down.
The urgency creates extreme tunnel vision. The brain shifts its energy away from exploration and novelty and exclusively asks what is safe and fast.
It literally forces you to stop exploring, which actually explains why we are seeing a cultural pushback against this constant digital urgency. You look at Heineken's 2024 campaign, The Boring Phone.
Oh, that was such an interesting move.
Yeah, they released a physical flip phone, stripped of all apps and internet, capable only of basic calls and texts. It was a direct, tangible reaction against the notification panic that forces us into that constant tunnel vision.
And the application of this psychological mechanism goes far beyond commerce. We see it used extensively in shaping online narratives and public discourse.
Yes, and we need to be very clear with you, the listener, right now. We are absolutely not taking any political sides here. We are strictly observing the underlying psychology of how groups are mobilized across the entire political spectrum.
Exactly. It's universal.
Right. And the sources show that highly partisan or extremist groups use a tactic researchers call a sense of controlled urgency.
The strategy involves a very specific dual framing mechanism. A target group or issue is presented simultaneously as ridiculous-like, something worthy of constant mockery, and as an immediate existential threat.
At the same time.
Yes, and this combination is psychologically potent. The framing of an existential threat triggers the amygdala, generating a passionate, angry reaction.
Which gets the clicks.
Right. But pure anger burns a lot of physiological energy and naturally fizzles out. By simultaneously framing the target as mockable, it provides a low-energy release valve for that emotion. This prevents the audience from burning out, keeping them engaged in a continuous, mobilized hot state day after day.
Wait a second. If marketers and social media algorithms use urgency to force us into tunnel vision, isn't tunnel vision exactly what we want when we are procrastinating?
Good point.
Like if I've been avoiding writing a massive proposal for 3 weeks, suddenly having tunnel vision sounds like a superpower?
Tunnel vision becomes your greatest asset, provided you are the one pointing the tunnel. And this is where we transition from being victims of panic to mastering motivation science. You can manually manufacture your own urgency to defeat procrastination without triggering the attentional vortex.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because how do we manufacture urgency without just flooding our bodies with stress hormones?
It comes down to manipulating activation energy. The author Mel Robbins popularized a tactical intervention for this with her 5-second rule.
Oh, I've heard of this.
To understand why it works, you have to look at the brain's dual operating system. You have the basal ganglia, which runs your routine autopilot, and the prefrontal cortex, which acts as the emergency brake.
Right.
Autopilot is highly energy efficient. The moment you have an instinct to act on a new, difficult goal like finally opening that blank document to write your proposal, your brain detects a deviation from your comfortable routine.
So it fights back.
Exactly. To save energy, it pulls the emergency brake and generates excuses to stop you.
And you literally have about 5 seconds from the moment of instinct before the brain rationalizes inaction.
That's the window. Counting backwards, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and forcing physical movement is a cognitive interrupt.
How does that work biologically?
At second 5, you perceive the task. Second 4, the routine autopilot tries to maintain control. By second 3 and 2, the excuses start forming. When you hit 1 and physically move, you bypass the emergency brake. You manufacture a microburst of urgency that occupies the brain just long enough to initiate action.
It's exactly like a controlled burn used by wildland firefighters. You are setting off a tiny intentional fire, that 5-second countdown, to clear out the dense brush of your own hesitation.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, doing that on a Tuesday prevents the massive, uncontrollable wildfire of a missed deadline from burning down your life on Friday night.
And the financial stakes of mastering this activation energy are staggering. In the hedge fund industry, portfolio managers frequently suffer from analysis paralysis.
All because they're dealing with so much data.
Exactly. They get so caught up in analyzing data variables that they delay execution on trades. Industry data shows this delayed execution creates a $17 billion annual drag on performance.
$17 billion. With a B.
With a B, hedge funds actually train their managers to develop an action bias using frameworks similar to the 5-second rule, forcing them out of what the industry calls comfort zone economics.
Wow. So, okay, we use the 5-second spark to initiate the task. We've bypassed the emergency brake, but starting is only half the battle. How do we sustain that pressure for like a 2-hour deep work session without slipping back into that frantic, error-prone state where our logic shuts down?
This requires a meta skill known as controlled urgency. It is essentially the professionalization of the fight-or-flight response.
The professionalization of fight or flight. That's a great phrase.
It is the learned ability to maintain executive function and keep the blood flowing to the prefrontal cortex while under intense external stress.
And you see this engineered perfectly in high-performance physical domains. Like in tactical shooting, there is a foundational mantra. Slow is smooth, and smooth is fast.
Yes.
Operators practice the 3-second drill, where they have to draw a weapon and fire accurately in under 3 seconds. But the instruction isn't to move your hands frantically. The focus is entirely on perfect, deliberate mechanics.
We found an identical philosophy in the boxing sources we reviewed, too. The Sonny Hayes 7-day boxing training program is built entirely around the concept of controlling chaos without hurry and applying pressure without panic.
Pressure without panic.
The manual specifically instructs the fighter to advance on the opponent with responsible composure. It explicitly states you are forbidden from throwing a punch unless your feet are correctly positioned. True professionals never rush. They systematically close the distance.
Mechanically, though, how is a boxer or a tactical operator keeping their brain in that cold state? When someone is literally punching you in the face, how do you prevent the amygdala from taking over?
Psychologists call it proactive cognitive reappraisal, which is really just a fancy way of saying you actively rewrite the story your brain is telling you in real time.
Okay, give me an example.
When most people feel the physical symptoms of panic, they use expressive suppression. They just try to push the anxiety down. They tell themselves, I'm fine, everything is fine.
Which never actually works.
Because the physiological cost of suppression is massive. Research shows it increases state anger, elevates your heart rate, and completely exhausts your cognitive resources.
What's reappraisal then?
Reappraisal is different. Instead of suppressing the physical arousal, you change how you label it. You view the ticking clock or the opponent not as a threat to your survival, but as a performance cue. You reappraise the stress hormones as fuel being delivered to your muscles and brain.
Oh, wow.
That mental shift actually changes your neurochemical signature, keeping the prefrontal cortex online.
This is exactly why elite performers practice so meticulously before the pressure ever hits. They build the neural pathways completely dry, without any time constraints or stress. They perfect the mechanics in a completely cold state.
What's fascinating here is the biological reason for that dry practice. When the hot state of urgency inevitably hits in a real-world scenario, your brain will desperately try to default to autopilot to save energy.
Right.
If you've built those pathways perfectly in a cold state, the autopilot that takes over is flawless.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this right now? If you are sitting at a desk with a massive analytical report due tomorrow, You can't exactly start doing boxing footwork drills in the office.
Probably not the best idea.
Right. So how do you apply this architecture of controlled urgency to a Tuesday afternoon without burning out by 4 p.m.?
We can borrow a framework from instructional designers who engineer focus for a living. There is a template used in virtual reality e-learning environments called the Freeze 360 block. It's designed to force attention during critical, high-stakes moments, and its 4 steps translate perfectly to knowledge work.
Let's break those steps down. Step 1 is freeze and lock orientation. In a VR simulation, the software physically locks the user's camera so they can only look at the hazard.
Right.
If I'm applying this at my desk, this means ruthlessly manipulating my physical environment. I'm closing every irrelevant tab, putting the phone in another room, and literally locking my orientation onto the document.
Step 2 is announcing the goal with a visible countdown timer. You don't just sit down with a vague intention to work on the report. You explicitly state, I'm going to draft the executive summary in the next 25 minutes, and you start a physical timer where your eyes can see the numbers counting down.
You are manufacturing a highly bounded time window.
Exactly.
Okay, so step 3 is unlock for action, where you actually execute the task within that manufactured pressure window. And step 4 has to be immediate feedback. When that 25-minute timer goes off, you immediately assess if you hit the goal, and you provide a micro reward to close the loop.
Precisely. You are weaponizing urgency against your own procrastination. But this raises a secondary challenge. Often, the panic we feel isn't just our own, it's imposed by managers or clients.
Oh, yeah, right. If I'm rushing to meet a deadline, my panic usually infects everyone around me. How do we manage the social layer of urgency?
This connects directly to the social engineering sources we pulled. Hackers use a concept called bounded calm to entirely bypass human panic protocols.
Okay, break that down for us.
In physical penetration testing, a social engineer might walk into a secure corporate building at the absolute peak morning rush, say 8:57 a.m. The receptionist is overwhelmed, processing dozens of people.
High-stress environment.
Very high stress. The hacker walks up to the desk, projecting total, unwavering certainty and bounded calm. They might say, the server cluster on floor 3 is reporting a technical fault loop. I need immediate access.
But why doesn't the receptionist panic and call security? The hacker is demanding immediate access to a sensitive area.
Because of mirror neurons. Humans are biologically wired to co-regulate our nervous systems based on the people around us. Even though the hacker's words convey an urgent crisis, they intentionally project 0 physical markers of panic.
Interesting.
Their breathing is slow, their vocal pitch is low and steady, and their micro-expressions are relaxed. Because the hacker doesn't physically project stress, the receptionist's amygdala never receives the biological signal to trigger security protocols. The bounded calm acts as an override code.
You can use that exact same bounded calm on yourself. When you are starting a daunting task, project total, physical certainty to your own brain. Keep your breathing slow. You are essentially bypassing your own internal security protocols that scream, this is too hard, let's check our email.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, maintaining this level of controlled urgency and bounded calm is highly effective, but it is not free.
What do you mean?
It requires significant emotional labor to constantly reappraise stress, and emotional labor inevitably leads to mental fatigue. The research is definitive that sustaining executive function under pressure burns massive amounts of glucose and cognitive resources.
But we have to actively offset that fatigue to prevent burnout.
You manage it by regulating your physiological arousal. Elite performers, from operators to athletes, use slow nasal breathing during execution to keep their heart rate down. So, for your afternoon deep work, use the Freeze 360 method to create tight 25-minute windows of focus.
Right.
Combine that with deliberate nasal breathing to constantly signal to your amygdala that you are safe, keeping you anchored in a cold state. And most importantly, attach a meaningful, structured reward to the end of the session to replenish your intrinsic motivation.
Let's summarize this journey for you. We started by looking at the biological trap of the attentional vortex, where sudden, unexpected panic starves our prefrontal cortex and makes us react blindly to the loudest stimulus. We saw how marketers and digital platforms exploit those exact time-pressure reflexes to force our brains into tunnel vision. And finally, we discovered how to take that weapon and wield it ourselves.
Exactly.
By using the 5-second rule to bypass the brain's emergency brake, practicing cognitive reappraisal to rewrite the story of stress, and applying the smooth is fast philosophy of bounded calm, you can turn panic into a precision tool.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought about the broader environment we are operating in today. We've established that controlled urgency relies heavily on our ability to regulate our physical and emotional states.
Yeah.
But what happens when our increasingly urgent digital environments that ping us, notify us, and demand our immediate attention 24/7 fundamentally outpace our biological ability to self-regulate? Are we slowly evolving to live in a perpetual hot state? And if so, what does that mean for the future of deep, slow, critical thinking?
That is something to seriously ponder the next time your phone buzzes with an urgent notification. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, the next time you feel the panic rising, you don't have to surrender to the vortex, because now you know. Most people only become productive when they panic, but you can choose to be productive on purpose.